Yes, welcome back to my YouTube studio. Yes, I'm in the MC Hammer now, and you hear maybe a little bit of rain. Yes, it's a rainy day, so that's why I'm not driving. But today I will talk about charging speed and charging power. So this is a follow-up video to the one I had a couple of days ago, where I compared 4 different EVs charging. But in the end, I also told you guys that what matters is the actual charging speed you get in kilometers per hour, and also how much each car initially has as a range before it actually needs to charge. So yes, let me explain a little bit. You see, I'm wearing a t-shirt here. It says, "Who cares about reasoning anyway?" Yeah, yeah, who cares about reasoning anyway? So let's dig into this. So here we have a nice diagram of lots of charging power, charging sessions, and you see actually, this is based on real-world data. It's most of these other cars here, I collected the data myself, except for Taycan and Model 3. I saw some video on YouTube, someone charging, and I just looked at the different kilowatt and plotted it in here. And you see that Taycan is charging at really impressive speed, up until about 270 kilowatt, and then it has this really sudden step down. And then Model 3 has a more even, linear ramp down. Yes, and here, but you see, well, at around 50%, then the Model 3 can't keep up. Taycan has really smooth and flat curve all the way to about 70%. Really impressive. Same thing for e-tron here. You see, flat all the way, and then it starts ramping down. And one thing you can notice that you see that the speed is slowly going up, and this is because e-tron is locked to 350 amp current, and as you charge higher and higher, then the voltage goes up. And the charging power is voltage time current, so that's why it goes up almost 250 kilowatt here, and then it starts ramping down again. Model X is really disappointing. You see it ramps up really slow, and then it keeps the maximum speed for not too long before it starts dropping. This one could be fixed easily with a software update. I'm not sure why they did like this, because my Model 3 also did similar things when it was new back in the days. That was about 6 months ago, but recently when I plug it in a supercharger or Ionic charger, it ramps up really fast. Yes. But on the other hand, the ramp down here on Model X is very disappointing. See, it was fast here, and boom, it goes even below EQC. What the heck? And then the Model X has one of the worst charging speeds at high state of charge. Yes. And let's look at the other cars here. I-Pace is around there. Yes, I-Pace will get an improvement. And you might be wondering, by the way, why didn't I see 100 kilowatt here? Well, I tried several times, and I did heat it up. I always heat up the batteries properly before I do the charging test. And the problem with I-Pace is that it would only peak at 100 kilowatt below 10% most of the time. Yeah, so that's why I couldn't get more than 80 kilowatts. See, most of the time it's hovering on 80 kilowatt only. E-Soul is down here. Very nice charging speed for E-Soul, because E-Soul costs a lot less than many of these other cars here. And you also see that E-Soul and I-Pace has similar charging speed. That's because both of these cars are actually charging at 200 amp, but I-Pace has higher voltage than E-Soul, so that's why. And the last one here you are happy to see, which is Ionic. Yes, but this is the old classic Ionic, 28 kilowatt hour. I included that one. It's the cheapest. Well, it's not the cheapest. You don't like that word. It's the most inexpensive. Wait, that's a double negation. It's the most inexpensive car in this comparison. But you see, it has really high charging speed. But this is just charging power in kilowatt. And what matters is actually something else. But let's look at something else before we do that, which is a C rating. So C rating is a number that tells you how fast it is charging according to its battery size. So if you have a C rating of 1, it will actually be, let's say, if you're charging at 70 kilowatt on a 70 kilowatt hour battery, that's a C rating 1. If the same battery is charging at 140 kilowatt, that's a C rating of 2. And you see something else. E-Soul is 64 kilowatt hour, but I have marked some of these batteries because these numbers is supplied by the manufacturer. But they are in fact the net capacity, whereas these other numbers is the gross capacity. Well, actually, I think Model X is actually 102 kilowatt hours, but okay. And what is the difference between the net capacity and gross capacity? Well, some cars, they have a top buffer. When it says 100%, it's actually not 100%. It's actually about 95% in some of these cars. And then all the EVs, they have a braking protection. So if you discharge it to 0%, it's actually not real 0%. It is because if you do that, you will actually ruin the battery. So it's called braking protection. And oops, I used this image viewer here. But let's see. So, but you know, what is this useful for? Well, it's just to see how fast the batteries are charging. So really impressive how fast Ionic is charging, but how healthy is it? Because many people also mention that, well, the e-tron is charging at a very impressive speed, but how is the degradation going to be with the e-tron? What you see here, it's charging at fairly high speed, but not as high as Taycan in terms of C rating, and not as high as Ionic. But you see that Tesla has a more, maybe a more careful approach. I mean, it goes really high at low state of charge, but I'm not an expert on batteries, but I think from what I heard, you can push out high C rating as long as you have one, good cooling, if the chemistry can take it, but also if the state of charge is low. But as you go higher, then you see that most cars, they can't take too crazy C rating, otherwise you might wear down the battery faster. But okay, this is somewhat useful, but on the other hand, not very useful in the real world. So what we have to look at is charging rate in distance. And now I base this on actual real, real world testing. So I base it on the consumption at 90 kilometers per hour on the highway, 56 miles per hour. And why that one? Well, because it's close to the VLTP and the EPA rating. But of course, I could make another graph based on the high speed, high-ish speed. But for most part, you would just shift the whole thing here a little bit downwards in the number of kilometers per hour. But you see, suddenly you see here that, what the heck? So Model 3 is charging just so much faster than Taycan. And how is that possible? Well, because Model 3 is one of the most efficient EVs here in this comparison, only beaten by Ionic. So, yeah, suddenly, you know, it makes more sense. The high charging rate in comparison, I mean, in combination with high efficiency, just makes the Model 3 stand out from the rest of the group. And you know, the high charging speed of Taycan is great, but the problem is that it is somewhat inefficient. Actually, it's quite inefficient, because when I look at the consumption numbers, Taycan consumes about 180 watt-hour per kilometer. And that is the same as Model X. So a Model X is a big-ass SUV, man. Heavier also, but Taycan is also somewhat heavy. But yeah, I'm not sure why the Taycan is so thirsty. I guess if we did a high-speed test instead, it would be better for the Taycan. But you see that, okay, so we have a Model X and, Model 3 and Taycan standing out there. And then you have the rest of the group. But you see also here that Model X actually beats e-tron at a certain point because it's more efficient, but then the e-tron catches up. Yeah, so really as expected all this, but you know, it's kind of hard to just look at these numbers and look at the graph and try to figure out how fast are they really. So I will come back to that. Let's look at the next one here, which is the kilowatt hour added. So in the previous graph, let me just go back here, I show you guys based on state of charge, and the state of charge is not that relevant really, because I mean, for example, Ionic looks really impressive, but where the heck is Ionic? Ionic is there. The Ionic is here, yeah. You see, it looks really high, but the problem with Ionic is that it's only 28 kilowatt hours versus these other cars with higher and bigger batteries. So we should also look at kilowatt hours added, and then also the time it takes. And then you see a different story. Okay, so we see that still these two titans, the Taycan and Model 3, they are battling up here, but then at a certain point, Taycan gets a lead. It goes faster at, I think it was over 50%. And then you see that e-tron actually beats those two cars again, because e-tron has a very flat charging curve. As for Model X and these other cars, okay, one thing you can notice that why the heck does it just stop here and here and here and don't go all the way? Well, because Ionic doesn't need that much time to fill up the small battery, and then Model 3 and Taycan, they charge so fast. So I only charge at 90% here. I don't go to 100%. It just makes no sense to go to 100% when you fast charge. But again, you know, the kilowatt hour added will just tell you parts of the story. So what we have to look at is actually range added. And now it makes more sense. You see, Now we see how much kilometers do we add after a given time. And now let's see. So the Model 3, to get 200 kilometers of range, Model 3 needs about 7 minutes, right? Whereas Taycan needs, how much is this? 12, 13 minutes, 12 minutes roughly. So that's a big difference, 12 minutes versus 7 minutes roughly. And then the gap just widens up. So let's say here, to add 350 kilometers, Model 3 needs about 18 minutes. And then Taycan needs over half an hour. So that's almost 2 times more. But you know, Taycan is a very expensive EV. Okay, let's look at something more affordable. e-tron. So again, you guys remember that e-tron has really impressive charging speed, but how impressive is it when you take into account the efficiency? Well, first of all, this is range added. So you might be thinking, what the heck? Let's say let's say some of these cars. Okay, for example, e-tron. E-tron has more than 350 kilometers of range. Why didn't you stretch it all the way there? Well, keep in mind that I always start with 10%. You know, you should never try to run the car down to 0%. So that's why this is actually range added after you arrive at 10%. But let's say, okay, to add 300 kilometers of range, it was again about 13, 14 minutes. Let's say 14 minutes on the Model 3. But it takes 34 minutes on an e-tron, you see. So yeah, this graph here is more useful if you want to figure out how fast does these cars charge. And then we will see one thing though, Ionic. Ionic charges at very impressive speeds. It even beats I-Pace. But the problem with Ionic is that it has a small battery, so it kind of stops there. Yeah, and also you see that towards the end, the Ionic flattens out here, because I think around here it was charging at only 22 kilowatt, close to 90%. But to see the numbers better, we should look at this table. So here we have 2 tables. I will explain. You see we have different models here, and then the time in minutes, and then this is kilometers added. So you see that Model 3 after 5 minutes gets 140 kilometers of range, whereas these other cars, they get way less range. And then after 10 minutes you get whatever range, and you see that actually that gap is just widening out. So Taycan can never catch Model 3 in terms of range added, no matter how long you charge. And then you look at e-tron. Remember, e-tron has really impressive charging speed, but it just barely beats Model X because Model X is more efficient. And then you might ask yourself, why the heck did the Model, I mean, e-tron should have won the race, the 1,000 kilometer challenge versus Model X. Well, actually, the reason why they came in more or less equal was that Model X has more initial range. So the Model X could drive 100 kilometers longer or further than the e-tron before it needed to do the first charge. That's why. And then as for these other cars, well, not much to say. They are slower, except for, okay, let's look at the case for Ionic then. So Ionic has actually, wow, it has, you see, it has speed similar to some of these bigger boys. But on the other hand, the problem with Ionic is that it doesn't have that much range. And keep in mind that this is the slow speed range, you know, the 90 kilometers per hour range. So when you go at higher speed, you can usually count on getting about a little over 100 kilometers at each charging stop. And that means that the disadvantage with the Ionic is that it needs to charge more often. And every time you take a charging stop, you have to add overhead. You have to add the time you exit from the highway, find a charger, plug in maybe some RFID, the handshake. All that stuff adds up, and that makes the Ionic slower than the other cars in practical race. But it would be great if there would be a bigger, I mean, an Ionic with a bigger battery pack, let's say 38 kilowatt hours, that could charge faster, let's say maybe 90, 100 kilowatt, right? Oh, the Bjørn, okay. All right, let's look at the next table. This next table might also be better, because here we look at how much the distance, or how many kilometers, I mean, how many minutes does it take to reach a certain range. And again, you see that Model 3 just shines there. It needs really short time to reach a certain kilometer. And then also, some cars say they won't be able to reach that one because, well, again, this is added distance, not the real one. Like I mentioned, you shouldn't go down to 0%. That could be risky. I will discuss that in another video. But again, Taycan can't really match up with the Model 3. And as for e-tron, well, very impressive speed to 300 kilometers, but it takes over half an hour. And actually, yeah, Taycan is, of course, faster. And as for Model X, yes, as expected. So this table might also be useful if you want to compare them in another way. And again, Ionic, yeah, can't really go that far. So and it takes half an hour to get 200 kilometers. Yeah, so... Anyway, that was somewhat interesting video, I think. You know, so this shows you guys the real world. Okay, it shows you parts of the real world. How to put this? The real world charging capabilities. Like I mentioned, what also matters in the end is how much range you initially have. I mean, technically, if you had a car with really good range, let me try to think of a car with really good range. Okay. For example, the e-Soul, like I mentioned. If you had to drive, let's say in Norway, where the speed limits are low, then the e-Soul could go really far before it needed to do its first charging stop. Whereas an Ionic couldn't go that far. But then on the other hand, Ionic would charge fairly fast and also is more efficient than e-Soul. But you know, that initial range is also very important because most people who drives far, they will start with a big, I mean, they always, people, they are smart, you know, they can plan out. There's no one who will start a long trip with 0% and then they go to the fast charger and begin the trip there. They will always start with either 90% or 100% before they do I was about to say the race, but they do the long trip. So yes, I hope this video was useful for you to understand better of how does it really work out in the real world. But like I mentioned, you know, it's just a charging thing here. And what I like about the 1000 kilometer challenge is that it puts all these properties together: the charging speed, the detour, the initial range you have, also the range you get on each charging session, all that stuff. It just adds up together. And there's one more thing I didn't mention until now, which is that which charging network can you access, and can you know, in all these graphs I show you is based on the perfect charging timing. But you know that in the real world, you can never get a perfect charging timing. You might have to stop before, like we saw in the e-tron video. I had to drive a little bit until I had my first charging stop. But then the next charging stop was only 107 kilometers away because I had to stop there because otherwise I would have to charge slow or whatever. So, and of course, again, there we have a very good advantage with Tesla because Tesla has the supercharger network and Tesla can also use the Ionic network. So Tesla, it's almost like a bisexual, you know, you have more to choose between, yes. So I think that'll be it for now. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, thank you for watching and talk to you later.